When a black homeless man rescues a lost child, his selfless act stirs the town. But no one is ready for the truth about his past. As his hidden identity comes to light, the revelation forces everyone to question their views on race, privilege, and humanity. How will this discovery divide, or unite, the community? The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson, as the town of Maplewood prepared for another quiet evening. For most residents, the night was a time of comfort and routine. But for Jordan, a black homeless man who roamed the streets, nights were colder, lonelier, and filled with uncertainty. The worn sleeping bag he carried wasn't just a makeshift bed. It was a reminder of the life he had lost. Jordan had become a fixture of the town, a shadow on the periphery of bustling diners and pristine parks. Most avoided him, some stared, and others whispered cruel assumptions about his character. But Jordan never let the stares bother him. He had bigger battles, ones no one could see. This night, as Jordan prepared to settle under the old oak tree in the park, a faint sound reached his ears. A soft, muffled sob. He paused, his breath visible in the cool air, straining to listen. It wasn't the typical noise of the night. It was the unmistakable sound of a child in distress. Jordan's heart tightened. He followed the sound, his cautious steps echoing on the empty pavement. Beneath the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, he found her. A little girl, no older than 6, huddled on the curb. Her cheeks were stained with tears, and her tiny frame shook with fear. "Hey there," Jordan said softly, lowering himself to her level. His deep, calming voice broke through the child's sobs. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" The girl looked up, her big blue eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. "I can't find my mommy," she stammered, her voice quivering. Jordan's heart ached as he knelt down, his weathered hands resting gently on his knees. "It's okay," he assured her. "We'll find her. You're not alone." The girl hesitated before inching closer, sensing the kindness in his voice. "I was playing at the park. And then I got lost," she whimpered. Jordan took a deep breath, glancing around the empty street. The park was deserted now, and the night felt colder than before. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lila," she replied, clutching a small stuffed bunny that had seen better days. "Well, Lila," Jordan said, offering a warm smile. "My name's Jordan. Let's get you back to your mum, okay?" He extended his hand, and Lila hesitated before slipping her tiny fingers into his. The contrast between her pale, delicate hand and his rough, dark skin was stark, yet neither seemed to notice. As they walked through the quiet streets, Jordan spoke to Lila in a soothing tone, asking her about her favorite games and songs. Slowly, her sobs subsided, replaced by shy giggles. For a moment, Jordan forgot his own struggles, focusing solely on the fragile little girl by his side. When they reached the corner store, Jordan spotted a payphone. Fishing in his pocket, he found a few coins and dialed the police. "I've found a little girl," he said, his voice steady. "She's lost, and we need to get her back to her family." The dispatcher assured him that officers were on their way. Jordan hung up and turned back to Lila, who was staring up at him with wide eyes. "You're really nice," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. Jordan chuckled softly. "I'm just doing what anyone would do, kiddo." But as he waited with Lila under the buzzing streetlight, Jordan couldn't shake the unease creeping into his heart. He knew what people thought when they saw him, a homeless black man with nothing to his name. How would they react when the police arrived? Would they see his kindness, or would they assume the worst? The sound of sirens broke his thoughts. Jordan crouched down to Lila's level, brushing a stray hair from her face. "These people are here to help, okay? They'll get you back to your mum." As the police car pulled up, Lila clung to Jordan's arm. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions guarded as they took in the scene. One of them approached, his hand resting on the holster of his belt. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. Jordan nodded, keeping his tone calm. "She got lost. I just stayed with her until you got here." The officer studied Jordan for a long moment, his gaze flicking between the man's worn clothes and the girl at his side. Lila spoke up, her voice small but firm. "He helped me. He's nice." The officer's expression softened slightly as Lila ran toward him, but the tension in the air remained palpable. Jordan stayed where he was, his hands visible at his sides. "Thank you for calling," the officer said, his tone clipped. "We'll take it from here." Jordan watched as Lila was gently guided into the police car, her stuffed bunny clutched tightly in her arms. She turned to wave at him, her face lit with a grateful smile. "Bye, Jordan." He waved back, his heart heavy and hopeful all at once. As the car drove away, Jordan stood alone under the streetlight. He had done what was right, but he couldn't help wondering how the town would see him now, or if they would see him at all. Little did he know, the night's events had set in motion a chain of revelations that would not only change his life, but shake the entire town to its core. By morning, news of the lost child's rescue had spread across the small town of Maplewood. In the diner on Main Street, regulars sipped their coffee and murmured about the mysterious black man who had helped little Lila find her way home. "Can you believe that homeless guy Jordan found her?" asked Edna, the diner's unofficial gossip queen. She leaned over the counter toward Sarah, the young waitress who had worked there since high school. Sarah placed a plate of eggs and toast on the counter, her brow furrowed. "What's wrong with that, Edna? He did a good thing." "Well," Edna huffed, stirring her coffee, "you never know about people like him. He's homeless, for heaven's sake. Who knows what he's hiding?" Sarah's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had seen Jordan around town for years, always quiet, always kind. But Edna wasn't alone in her skepticism. In the police station, Lila's mother, a frantic young woman named Rachel, hugged her daughter tightly as the officers explained what had happened. "So, this man, Jordan, you said?" Rachel asked, brushing Lila's hair back. "What was he doing with her?" Officer Miller, the younger of the two who had responded the night before, hesitated. "He found her crying near the park and called us right away. Stayed with her until we got there." Rachel's face softened with relief, but her husband, Tom, wasn't as convinced. "And we're just supposed to believe that?" he asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. "What was he even doing there at that time of night?" Miller exchanged a glance with his partner, a grizzled veteran named Officer Daniels. Daniels shrugged, his tone gruff. "The guy didn't cause any trouble. Honestly, he probably saved her from wandering off somewhere dangerous." Tom's jaw tightened, but Rachel intervened. "He helped our daughter, Tom. That's what matters." Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. By midday, whispers of Jordan's involvement had reached every corner of town. At the grocery store, in the library, and even in the schoolyard, the story grew, gaining layers of speculation and embellishment with each retelling. For Jordan, the day was like any other, or so he thought. He wandered the streets, head bowed, his belongings stuffed into a tattered backpack. He noticed the stares, sharper and more lingering than usual. A few people crossed the street when they saw him coming, their eyes darting away. At the corner store, where he usually bought a loaf of bread with the few dollars he earned from odd jobs, the cashier, who normally greeted him with a nod, avoided his gaze. "Everything okay?" Jordan asked as he handed over the crumpled bills. The cashier hesitated, his hands fumbling with the register. "Fine, just heard about last night." Jordan's chest tightened. "And? Just didn't know you were involved with that little girl," the man mumbled, handing back Jordan's change without looking him in the eye. Jordan didn't press further. He left the store, the weight of the town's judgment pressing harder with every step. Later that afternoon, as he sat on the bench near the park, a small voice called out, "Jordan!" He looked up to see Lila running toward him, her mother close behind. Lila's smile was as bright as the morning sun. "Hi," she said, bouncing on her toes. "I told my mommy you're the nicest." Jordan smiled, though he felt the eyes of Rachel fixed on him. "Hey Lila, you doing okay?" Lila nodded enthusiastically. "Mommy said I shouldn't wander off again." Rachel approached cautiously, her arms crossed. "Jordan, right?" "Yes, Mom," he said, rising to his feet. She hesitated, her eyes scanning him as if trying to read his intentions. "I wanted to thank you for helping Lila last night. I can't imagine what could have happened if you hadn't been there." Jordan nodded humbly. "She's a good kid. Just glad she's safe." Rachel's expression softened, but the tension didn't fully leave her shoulders. "Not everyone sees things that way," she said, her voice low. "I know," Jordan replied, his tone steady. Before Rachel could say more, Tom appeared, his face tight with disapproval. "Rachel, let's go. Lila doesn't need to be here." Tom insisted, taking Lila's hand and leading her away. Lila glanced back at Jordan, waving as her father pulled her along. Jordan sighed and sank back onto the bench. He had seen this before: gratitude soured by suspicion, kindness overshadowed by prejudice. What more could he do? What Jordan didn't realize was that one person in the town had been watching the scene unfold from a distance. A local journalist named Claire Turner. Claire had lived in Maplewood all her life, and she knew how quick the town was to judge. She had seen Jordan around for years and always wondered about his story. Now she had a reason to find out. As Jordan walked away from the park, Claire followed discreetly, her notepad in hand. She had no idea what she would uncover, but one thing was certain: there was more to this man than met the eye. Claire Turner wasn't the type to let a story pass her by, especially one that had the town buzzing. As a journalist for the Maplewood Gazette, she had built her career on uncovering stories that others overlooked. And now Jordan, the quiet black man whom most people ignored or judged unfairly, had her full attention. She followed him from a distance, watching as he made his way through the less-traveled streets of town. He moved with an air of quiet dignity, despite his tattered clothes and worn-out shoes. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper behind his reserved demeanor, something the town had missed. When Jordan turned down an alley behind the local church, Claire hesitated. She didn't want to intrude, but her instincts pushed her forward. She peeked around the corner and saw him sit on a wooden crate next to a small pile of belongings. From her vantage point, she noticed something odd: neatly stacked books among his possessions. Their spines gleamed faintly in the sunlight, revealing titles on philosophy, law, and history. "Who are you, really?" Claire whispered to herself. The next day, she decided to dig deeper. Starting at the public records office, she requested information on Jordan. What she found was sparse: just a name, Jordan Wallace, and a birth certificate indicating he was from the nearby city of Brighton. But there were no further records of employment, property ownership, or education. Frustrated but not deterred, Claire reached out to a contact in Brighton, a retired reporter named Greg, who had a knack for remembering people and stories. "Jordan Wallace, you said?" Greg asked over the phone. "Yes, he's homeless now, living in Maplewood. I'm trying to find out more about him," Claire explained. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Greg's voice returned, quieter, almost reverent. "You're telling me Jordan Wallace is homeless?" Claire's heart skipped a beat. "You know him?" "Everyone in Brighton knew him," Greg said. "He was one of the brightest legal minds I'd ever seen. Graduated at the top of his class from Howard University Law School. People used to call him the people's lawyer. He represented clients who couldn't afford big city attorneys. Civil rights cases, wrongful convictions, community battles. Jordan was a hero." Claire felt a lump in her throat. "What happened?" Greg sighed heavily. "He took on a massive case about 8 years ago. A black teenager was accused of assaulting a police officer. The evidence was flimsy, and Jordan exposed how the officer had fabricated parts of his testimony. But the case brought him enemies. The officer's connections in law enforcement and politics ran deep. Jordan won, but at a cost. He started getting harassed. Threats, false accusations, even his license was revoked over trumped-up charges. His reputation was shattered, and he disappeared not long after." Claire sat in stunned silence. The man the town had dismissed as just another homeless drifter had once been a champion for justice. "Why didn't he fight back?" she asked. "He did, for as long as he could," Greg replied. "But the system wore him down. Sometimes even the strongest people break." Claire ended the call with a newfound determination. Jordan Wallace wasn't just a man down on his luck. He was someone who had once stood against injustice and paid the price. Now she had a story to tell, one that could not only change how the town saw him, but also force it to confront its own biases. That same afternoon, Claire published her article, "The Forgotten Hero, Jordan Wallace's Story." She painted a vivid picture of his rise as a brilliant lawyer, his fight for justice, and the devastating consequences he endured. The article included quotes from people he had once helped, praising his courage and integrity. The piece spread like wildfire. By evening, the townspeople were buzzing again. But this time the tone was different. At the diner, Edna, who had been so quick to judge, sat in stunned silence as she read the article on her phone. "I had no idea," she muttered. glancing around as if looking for someone to confirm what she'd read. "This is the man who saved our daughter," she said softly, her voice breaking. Tom, still skeptical, leaned back in his chair. "So what? That doesn't change the fact that he's homeless now." Rachel shot him a sharp look. "It changes everything. He deserves more than what this town has given him." Unaware of the growing attention, Jordan spent his evening as usual, quietly reading under the dim light of a street lamp. But the next morning, everything changed. As he walked through town, people who once avoided him now stopped to greet him. A few offered him food, while others awkwardly muttered apologies for how they had treated him. The biggest shock came when Lila and Rachel found him sitting on his usual park bench. Rachel approached him, her eyes filled with emotion. "You didn't just save my daughter that night," she said, handing him a warm meal wrapped in foil. "You reminded this town what kindness looks like." Jordan looked at her, bewildered. "What's going on?" Rachel smiled, pulling out a copy of Claire's article. "Your story is out there now, Jordan. People know who you are." Jordan's hands trembled as he took the paper, his eyes scanning the headline. For the first time in years he felt seen, not as a shadow on the edge of society, but as the man he once was. But not everyone welcomed the story. Among the whispers of admiration were murmurs of dissent, voices questioning whether the town should be rewarding a man who had fallen so far. As Jordan sat on the bench, holding the article in his hands, he felt the first flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The days following Claire's article saw Maplewood come alive with mixed emotions. For some, Jordan Wallace's story sparked admiration and regret. But for others, it stirred resentment. Conversations about race, privilege, and redemption filled the coffee shops, classrooms, and town hall meetings. Jordan had become a lightning rod for the town's collective conscience, an embodiment of their biases, fears, and humanity. At the town square, a group of residents gathered for an impromptu meeting. Edna, her earlier judgment now tinged with guilt, addressed the small crowd. "We've ignored him for years," she said, clutching a printed copy of Claire's article. "All the while, he was someone who gave everything to fight for people like us. I think it's time we repay him." A man in the back raised his hand. "Repay him? For what? He's still just a homeless man now. What difference does it make what he used to be?" "It makes every difference," Sarah, the waitress from the diner, shot back. "We judged him because of his appearance, because he was homeless. We never stopped to think about how he got here or who he really is. Doesn't that bother you?" The man shrugged. "Look, I feel bad for the guy, but what are we supposed to do? Give him a handout? That's not going to change anything." Before the argument could escalate, a voice rang out from behind the crowd. "It's not about giving him a handout. It's about giving him dignity." All eyes turned toward Claire Turner, who stepped forward, a clipboard in hand. Jordan Wallace fought for justice when he didn't have to. He stood up for people when no one else would. And we turned our backs on him when he needed us most. It's time to change that. The town began to mobilize, inspired by Claire's words. A group of volunteers formed to clean and repair the old community center, a place where Jordan could stay and rebuild his life. Local businesses pitched in with donations, offering food, clothes, and supplies. But for every act of kindness, there were whispers of dissent. Tom, Lila's father, voiced his frustrations during a town meeting. "Why are we bending over backward for this guy?" he asked, his voice tight with skepticism. "What's to stop him from ending up back on the streets? People like him don't change." Rachel, seated beside him, stood abruptly. "People like him? You mean people who gave everything to help others? Or do you just mean black people?" A murmur rippled through the room, the tension palpable. Tom flushed but said nothing. Rachel continued, her voice strong. "Jordan Wallace is more of a man than most of us could ever hope to be, and the fact that we let him suffer in silence for so long should make us all ashamed. I know it makes me ashamed." The room fell silent. In that moment, it became clear that this wasn't just about Jordan. It was about the town's collective guilt and their willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Despite the town's efforts, Jordan was hesitant to accept their help. When Claire approached him with the idea of using the community center as a shelter and resource hub, he shook his head. "I appreciate what you're trying to do," he said quietly, "but I don't want charity." "This isn't charity, Jordan," Claire insisted. It's an acknowledgement of everything you've done, and everything you still can do. You have a story that can inspire people. Don't let them forget it. Jordan's eyes softened, but the weight of his pride and years of rejection held him back. What if I'm not that man anymore? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. You always were, and now the world finally sees it. The following Sunday, the town held a gathering at the newly restored community center. Dozens of people came, bringing food, supplies, and donations. Jordan stood awkwardly at the edge of the room, watching as people mingled and laughed. Rachel approached him, holding Lila's hand. This place wouldn't be here without you, she said, smiling warmly. I didn't do anything, Jordan replied, his voice low. Yes, you did, Rachel insisted. You reminded us of what it means to care for one another. As Lila hugged him, Jordan felt a lump in his throat. For years he had felt invisible, forgotten. But now he realized he wasn't alone anymore. When Claire called him to the stage to speak, Jordan hesitated. But as he looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people who had once avoided him, now waiting to hear his voice, he found the strength to step forward. I never thought I'd see a day like this, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. For a long time, I believed that people had forgotten about me, that my story didn't matter. But last week, a little girl reminded me of something important. Kindness doesn't need a reason. It just needs a heart. The room erupted in applause. But Jordan wasn't finished. We've all made mistakes, he continued. I've made plenty of my own, but if we're willing to listen, to help, and to see the humanity in one another, we can build something better. Not just for me, but for all of us. The standing ovation that followed was unlike anything Jordan had ever experienced. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope, not just for himself, but for a town that was finally learning to change. Months passed, and the transformation of Maplewood became undeniable. What began as an effort to help Jordan Wallace evolved into a collective reckoning for the town. A journey of learning, accountability, and change. The community center, once a neglected building, now stood as a vibrant hub of activity. It wasn't just a place for Jordan, it became a safe haven for others who had fallen on hard times. People who had once been invisible were now seen, their stories heard and valued, and at the heart of it all was Jordan, whose quiet strength inspired the town to keep pushing forward. Jordan didn't just accept the community's help. He became an integral part of its growth. At the insistence of Claire and a few other determined residents, he began hosting workshops at the center, teaching people about their legal rights. Drawing on his years of experience as a lawyer, Jordan helped residents navigate issues like wrongful evictions, workplace discrimination, and access to public resources. His first workshop was attended by only a handful of people. By the fourth, the room was packed. Jordan, you're amazing at this, Sarah, the waitress, said after one session. You've helped so many people already. Jordan smiled, a mix of humility and pride in his eyes. I'm just paying it forward. This town gave me another chance. It's only right I do the same for others. Not everyone had embraced the changes as quickly as others. Tom, Lila's father, remained skeptical for weeks after the town rallied around Jordan. But one day, while driving home, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Jordan helping an elderly man fix a flat tire on the side of the road. Tom pulled over, stepping out of his truck. Need a hand? He asked, his voice gruff but sincere. Jordan glanced up, surprised. I think I've got it, but thanks. Tom hesitated before kneeling beside Jordan, picking up a wrench. The two men worked in silence, the tension between them easing with each turn of the bolt. When the job was done, Tom wiped his hands on a rag and looked at Jordan. I've been wrong about a lot of things, he admitted. But seeing what you've done for this town, I can't ignore it anymore. You've got my respect. Jordan nodded, his voice steady. Thanks, Tom. It means more than you know. The two men shook hands, a simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of forgiveness and understanding. Claire continued writing about the town's progress, chronicling the small but significant changes taking root in Maplewood. Her articles drew attention beyond the town's borders, with neighboring communities reaching out to learn from their example. One day, a local news crew arrived to interview Jordan. Standing in front of the community center, He spoke about his journey with a mix of candor and hope. "I lost everything once," he said. "Not just my career or my home, but my faith in people. This town reminded me that change is possible, not just for individuals, but for entire communities. We can't undo the past, but we can shape the future, one act of kindness at a time." The interview went viral, sparking a wave of donations to the community center and inspiring similar initiatives in other towns. Jordan's story became a beacon of hope, proof that even the darkest chapters of a person's life could lead to brighter days. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jordan sat on the steps of the community center, a warm breeze ruffling the pages of the book in his hands. Lila ran up to him, her laughter ringing through the air. "Hi, Jordan," she chirped, holding out a drawing she had made. He smiled as he took the picture. It showed a tall man with kind eyes standing in front of the community center, surrounded by smiling faces. "Is this me?" he asked, his voice touched with emotion. Lila said proudly, "You're like a superhero." Jordan chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm no superhero, Lila. Just a guy trying to do the right thing." Rachel approached, carrying a plate of cookies. "You're a hero to us," she said, setting the plate beside him. As the three of them sat together, watching the sky shift from gold to deep purple, Jordan felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The shadows of his past still lingered, but they no longer defined him. He was part of something bigger now, a community that had learned to see the humanity in one another. And as the stars emerged one by one, Jordan knew that his story wasn't just about redemption. It was about transformation, for himself and for everyone he had touched along the way.